Welcome to Relationship Mastery, a podcast for those who want to learn how to master the art of creating happy, healthy, and loving relationships. Please join me, Adey-Jones, and my co-host, Barry Selby, each Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific for a lively and informative conversation on everything to do with relationships. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Barry. We've already just talked the whole show through.
We have, yeah.
So let's see if we can remember what we were talking about. So we were just talking about power struggles, and they show up in every relationship. We just want to say that it's not just in our intimate relationships, even though it's harder to deal with in those. But it
Yes.
shows up, and it's so funny because I had an experience this week with a friend who she's just always in a power struggle. And it's so interesting so that just sort of came up for me, but it's also very pertinent right now. I see a lot of, especially with what's been going on in the DNC this week, and just watching what I would consider incredible mutual respect, and and there not being this power struggle, that you can honor each other in a relationship. You can both be powerful, and you can both have the respect of the other person. But there are some, Barry was just sharing about the meme that's going around, or rather the phrase trad wife right now, which is a belief that women should go back to being like the 50s housewife, which we're going to do a whole thing on that. separate issue
Yes.
there. But I really wanted to talk about power struggles in a relationship because they are so damaging on every level. There is never going to be trust, intimacy, safety, respect in a relationship where there's a power struggle. And, some of you might be going, well, what do you mean by power struggle? And what I want to point out is if you're in a relationship with another person, that always has to be right.
Right.
Or they belittle you. They belittle your feelings, your actions, maybe even where you came from, or your culture or your traditions. They can use that to manipulate and dominate and put you down. If you feel that you're with somebody that's patronizing, this is what this woman I know does. She patronizes. There, sort of. If you're feeling that way, then you're in a power struggle. It
Yeah.
might not be overt, but it's happening. So we're going to talk about ways it can damage the relationship and ways to handle it.
Also, some of the symptoms too, we should speak about as well.
Exactly. Oh, speak more about that, Barry.
Well, because the things we talk about that, what came up for me, because I know I'm aware of certain power struggle paradigms I watched, and there were certain traits that I became aware of. A couple of them. One of which is needing attention. Like, in fact, not just needing attention, but wanting to be the center of attention.
Wow.
So
Okay.
it's almost like a power struggle to push the other person out of the way of the limelight and then being in the limelight. That's one way of seeing it.
Interesting.
Yes, another one I would look to talk about is control, because the other part about power struggles is they want to be in control of everything.
Absolutely.
Because the challenge about not being in control is you don't feel like you have any power. And so some people conflate the two together, which they're not the same, but they are often conflated because some people feel like the only way they can have calmness, for example, is to be in control, which means they've got to have a power struggle with their partner to maintain the control of the relationship, which
Yeah.
isn't healthy.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I always say, in my work with narcissists and codependents, it's that my way or the highway. It's like, because there's this anxiety of being out of control. And I know in my former relationship that with a very, very traditional person, which I didn't see it in the beginning because I was quite powerful when I came into the relationship. I was a costume designer, and I worked with celebrities and things like that. So there was this admiration going on. So there was this, I didn't notice it at that time. I was being admired. So I didn't realize there was a very traditional, sort of patriarchal sort of mindset there. I mean, I must admit, once it started showing up, I was too deep in to really say, hang on a minute, this is not for me. So it did show up at some point, but I didn't see it initially. But you're right. It's that control, that domineering, that and the dismissiveness. It was quite interesting to experience it from a woman, actually. But we can
Mhm.
also experience it, like I say, in our friendships, but also within our parents. Sometimes they're so locked into that role of, I'm your parent, you don't question me. I know, I'm all knowing. You follow what I say, and so you can have that dynamic there too, not just in our intimate personal relationships.
Indeed, and part of that, and also just to put another piece into the conversation, because I'm just thinking about the ways that power struggles show up, is on because I said about how a lot of times it can be about being wanting to be the center of attention or wanting to be in control. Oftentimes, as well, just to add more flavor to this, is sometimes the power struggle comes from the person wanting to be seen and being included. Like they almost feel like they're being left out. So but it's not done in a place of like, please see me. It's more like, I'm in charge, I can handle it. And that's a controlling gesture of trying to struggle with the other person. So they can feel like they're included and not being left out. So the challenge with the power struggles is it usually comes from a belief in a disparity between partners
Well,
where they don't feel
absolutely.
they're equal to.
Yeah.
So it comes up with different flavors, which is what we're talking about.
Exactly, and it's so true what you just said. It really is. It's a power struggle always comes from a place of weakness, of
Hmm.
fragility, of
Yeah.
fear. It's a fear-based reaction to overpower another human being. Now, if you weren't afraid of them, why on earth would you need to overpower them? If you weren't, it's very simple. But these people, they believe their own BS. They believe their own, spin on things, that I'm all powerful. I can control the masses. It's like, no, you're just announcing how weak you are if you need to control the masses. It's so.
They don't want to know that.
Say that again.
They don't want to be shown that. They want to pretend that they know what they're doing.
Exactly, exactly. It's so funny. I always have to laugh when people do it. It's like, oh, okay, all right, I'll let you have that one because I know the truth. I know the truth of what's going on here. But if you need to make this sort of pronounce to the world that you're better than me, but going back to what you said, which is what is so true, if we really recognize that we are all equal, as spiritual beings having a human experience, we do know that when we put on these human suits, that we have physical differences, we have differences on every level, intellectual, emotional, physical. Yes, we know there are differences, but no one is better than another, ever,
Right.
ever. And if we
Yeah.
know that as a fundamental truth, we will never, ever have to gain power over another human being, belittle
Mhm.
another human being to build ourselves up. There's just this acceptance of like, we're all equal and you have a different opinion to me, and that's warranted. You're entitled to that.
Understandably, the thing I want to add to that is there's no benefit, or no, excuse me, there's no one-upmanship if somebody's louder. Like
Yeah.
you're saying, that we are all equal. But the thing is, some people look at somebody else's volume or somebody else's appearance or somebody else's entitlement, whether or not it's justified or not, as giving them sort of an up level where they feel better than. Makes you feel like we're not as equal to them. But when you're saying it, and I'll echo this, the fact we are all equal because we are all divine spiritual beings having human experience, we keep forgetting that when we're in the human perception, and that we think that we're only the three dimensions of who we are as human beings. So we don't necessarily see beyond the illusion that somebody keeps perpetrating on us. So we think somehow we were less than. So we then sort of feel like we have to do something about that. And yet, yes, if we are recognizing the truth and we do honor that we are all equal, independent of how we look and independent of what people say, there's nothing to fight over. There's no struggle involved at all. We can simply go, you know what? That's you. That's not me.
Yeah.
And it becomes freeing.
No,
I think.
absolutely. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about, your experience, which you've referenced on the show before, about, being bullied. And
Hmm.
horrific as that is to be bullied, if we can, for twofold. Number one, teach our children what we've just shared, which is we're all equal, regardless of how we look or what we say or what we do, and how much money we have or how much, perceived power we have in the world. If we recognize that, then we can stop the bully from becoming the bully. But I think if we can also teach our children who are on the other end of that bullying, that bully has no power over them. That bully is coming from a very scared, weak place, and to have compassion for them. Don't engage, learn the tools on how to not engage with them, You don't have to belittle them and say, well, you're weak because you're bullying. We don't need to get into that power struggle, because then that's just more one-upmanship that can go on. But to genuinely see that it's not coming from a place of strength. And so therefore they're not taking anything from us. Our strength is ours, it's within us. It's we can give it away if we want, but we don't have to. So I think that's so important in those situations. But going back to just the intimate relationship for right now, because that's what we focus on, all relationships here, but
Yes, indeed.
the intimate relationship for a second. When we, the power dynamic, I think it's natural that it comes into a relationship at some point. I mean, everybody's trying to find their place in the relationship. The
Right.
masks are off, the initial, do you like me? If I present this side of myself, is that who you want me to be? Once we've
Mhm.
got over that stage and we are revealing ourselves, we become more vulnerable. And it's
Yes.
when we're vulnerable that sometimes, unbeknownst to us, we can get into power struggles, because we don't
Well,
lose our, our independence, or our there's just a fear that, again, we're experiencing the fear, so therefore we are engaging in some of the power struggles.
this is the development of trust in relationship, because it is definitely the case where it's kind of when you're in partnership. Excuse me. There is this kind of like, if I reveal this, will you reveal that sort of thing? There's almost like an agreement of revealing more and more of each other to each, more and more of ourselves to each other, because some people in relationship, unfortunately, are so lacking in the trust of their other selves or the other person, they keep maintaining this facade that puts in the place of like this pretense of being in power or being together, and so they don't want to risk being vulnerable because they don't want to risk losing their partner. But by the very act of being in that position of power, they're pushing their partner away.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have this really interesting paradigm where we think we should do something to save the relationship, but in fact, it's the opposite that will actually save it, which is basically being authentic and being trusting and being vulnerable. But the power struggle oftentimes comes because, as you said, one person is revealing themselves, being more authentic, being more true, being more vulnerable. The other person isn't. And so there's this disparity of equality that's showing up.
Yeah,
And the question is, how do you deal with that?
exactly. And sometimes people will I know I've certainly experienced this myself, and I was having this conversation with somebody last week about just about that, about wanting to share intimately, wanting to
Mm.
be vulnerable, and wanting to own our own, our maybe mistakes or things that we may have said that we regret, and saying sorry in a relationship, just saying, I'm sorry I did that. And what was happening with this particular client was that the more that she kept saying sorry, the more her partner would say, "See, I don't, you're apologizing again because you were wrong. I mean, I don't have to apologize for my behavior." And it's like, well, actually, it's not. The apology
Right.
is not, doesn't mean that that person is his behavior is worse than your behavior. It just means that they're owning it. They're actually being vulnerable and saying, you know what, I said something the other day that I would like to take back, or I'd like to clarify, or I'd like to apologize for. I was emotional, I didn't really mean it, or whatever it is. But that lack, again, that's that power struggle of, oh, somebody's just being vulnerable. I'm going to stay in a position of power and make them, point out that they are less than me because they've had to say sorry and I haven't. That is
Right.
such a dangerous trap in a relationship.
Absolutely. And that's the biggest piece is trusting yourself. And it's because that's where we find our most strength is when we get into a relationship. This is again off the theme, but it comes back to the same piece, which basically oftentimes in a relationship, we get caught up in the paradigm of approval seeking and looking, needing for the other person's approval. And so in a way, we're giving our power to them and they become in charge, and we feel out of sorts with that. So when we do trust ourselves, like you were saying, when we come back to really honoring who we are, there's no need to seek outside. Even though we've got a partner right in front of us, we don't need them to make us feel better.
Mhm.
We make ourselves feel better,
Yeah.
and that's the way through.
Exactly. And I think that's very true. And, we say sorry for basically for ourselves. I mean, I do anyway. When I say I'm sorry, it's not really, I'm sorry, do you still like me? It's like, I have to be in integrity with myself. And when I know that I've done something that, not particularly proud of. I was emotional, I was reactive, or whatever it was. I want to own it and I want to say sorry because I feel better about myself when I've done
Mm.
that. But as I said, in the past, I've been in a relationship where when I said sorry, it was like I was handing a bat to somebody else that was like, oh, really? Thank you. Let me take that bat off you and whack you a few times with it. And
Right.
what ends up happening is, even though you're saying sorry to be in integrity with yourself, you do stop for a second and go, well, wait a minute. I am sorry for what I said or what I did or whatever. But do I really need to keep handing this back to somebody that's going to slug me with it?
Hmm.
So you start altering your behavior it's because in the end you've got to protect yourself, and if it's used against you, then you're going to stop doing it. And again, when you can't take responsibility in a relationship and you can't own the little things that you may have said or done that have led to sort of less harmony in your relationship, and that's the beginning. That's disintegrating right then. There's no trust, there's no openness, vulnerability, authenticity. You're guarded, you're protected, you're careful. That's not a real relationship.
No. The thing is, what's happening is you're putting up more walls and more defenses. And as you said way earlier in the conversation, you're not being vulnerable, you're not being authentic, so you're not being seen. And so the relationship becomes a game of pretense, ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a healthy relationship. Ideally, if you're in a really being a masterful relationship, as we call our podcast, the more authentic, the more vulnerable, the more real you are, the better your relationships are going to be. And ideally, your partner does the same thing. That's why power struggles don't serve this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's also, it's really demeaning. It's basically saying to your partner, you know, I don't trust you. I don't respect you. I don't value you. You're less than me. I mean, who wants to live with that?
Right.
It's pretty scary. I think I gave myself a little post traumatic stress disorder reaction there. It was like, oh, I remember that feeling.
Mm-hmm. No, I understand.
Yeah.
And I mean, what we're talking about here is not necessarily, well, no, say it is quite likely to impact some people's personal experience, like it did for you, because that's the thing is, this is not, we're not talking about theoretical stuff. We're talking about real life experiences. And there's something that I love about the work we talk when we talk about this stuff is that somebody listening to this will actually go, "Oh, I can change it now because I heard what I need to hear." So, absolutely, this is real life stuff we're talking about. That's why we do what we do.
Yeah. Absolutely. And if we're saying, if it's triggering you, like I just triggered myself, um, that's a good thing. That's
Yeah.
your body letting you know that you're not in a self-honoring relationship. That I've got to mention it because I've been glued to the TV the last few days, but watching the interaction between Obama and Michelle, um,
Hmm.
I mean Barack and Michelle Obama, the mutual respect, the it's so breathtaking to me when I see that when I see somebody, two people lifting each other up,
Right.
really admiring each other and loving each other and support, and being humorous and funny about it. Like I think he said something like, I'm the only fool that would follow Michelle in trying to deliver
Right.
the speech because both of them spoke so eloquently and beautifully, um, for me. Um, but again, but what struck me more than just what they said, which was incredible, what they said, was the mutual respect, the loving and the honoring of each other. And I think that when we get into that power struggle in a relationship, there can be, instead of just really recognizing each other, we can get into our positions of being competitive with each other, you know, who and one upping each other.
Right. But also the challenge is that that becomes a win lose conversation
Mhm.
because somebody has to lose if somebody wins in that
Yeah.
power struggle. Where like with Michelle and Barack, they both win because they both um, edify each other in a sense, but not out of place of like trying to make them look good to other people because they really believe about each other.
Mhm.
And that honoring and that mutual respect, frankly, in public life is it isn't very common, which is one reason I think that they stand out so much amongst almost anybody else, regardless of politics. It's just in in visible couples in the world, so to speak. And so the model they demonstrate is one that so many people could learn from, because it's not about showing things off. It's about really showing the love and the compare of the other person and honoring who they are. And so it's not the opposite of power. It's simply the recognition that each person deserves that respect from each other, and they are so happy to give it.
Yeah.
You know, that's such a statement.
Yeah, and you know who else? Another couple that's probably anybody who's listening is probably, who are they? So long ago. But I always remember reading an article about Paul Newman and his wife, Joanna Woodward, and her,
Hmm.
was it Joanna Woodward? Am I saying that correctly?
Natalie or Joanne? I think it was. I think,
Oh, anyway, his wife.
yeah,
Sorry, I correct his wife.
Natalie was the daughter, I think.
But the bottom line is that he was into racing cars, which she couldn't bear to watch because it was just too fearful for her. And she loved to go to the ballet, and he didn't. And somebody said, well, what is the secret to the success of your marriage? And it was just that, no power struggle, just nobody trying to make the other one bend to their will. It was like respecting each other as individuals and having different wants and needs and likes in the world, and pursuing those passions, and stop expecting your partner to drop everything in their world and become a part of your world, or vice versa, which is
Yeah.
huge.
It's the this trick. This is the thing I discovered in past relationships for me, that where I didn't honor that for myself, and I ended up becoming so, well, passive is one word, but it's basically placating my partner rather than actually living my own truth. And frankly, I know that was one of the things that undermined the relationships. And what wasn't about them, it was about me. Even though I did it, it's like I made the relationship fail because I didn't stay in my truth and do what I need to do for myself. And it's a lesson I've learned enough times now where I won't go back to that.
Mm-hmm.
But it is like what you said about them is Paul's Newman and Joanne Woodward's focus points were not detracting from the relationship. It actually restored the relationship, because by allowing them to do their own thing, when they came back together, it renewed their connection. It renewed their love of each other, because they came back fulfilled in what they were doing that the partner couldn't give them. And then they came back into the loving relationship. And that's a map for a healthy relationship, frankly.
Absolutely. And you know, it's so funny. I do have to say, and again, it's it's a little bit of my shadow, but because I have lost myself in a relationship. I lost myself in my one of my very first relationships. I remember, I think I've shared it here. I remember thinking, I'm never doing that again, and I didn't for many many years. But then
Right.
in my long term relationship and dynamics of children and things like that, I did lose myself again. I because I started to, I wasn't trusting my own, because I put my children first, and I was like, I have to do this for them. I have to do this for them. And but what it did is I lost myself. In the first day, I did lose myself in that relationship towards the end. Thank God I found myself again. But I am very sensitive after that relationship, or even before that, because of my first relationship, my experience then. If ever I sensed that the man I was with was not being authentic and not honoring themselves and bending themselves into something they thought I wanted, I could smell that a mile off, maybe because I had that quality in myself. And it,
Right.
it, it just turned me off so completely. And I still have it very strongly. And I will say to my partner, because he's so loving and so great and so wonderful, often I do have to say, what do you really want? Like, don't do this to please me. Like, don't. I need you to be you. I need you to be, to really honor yourself, because bending to my will destroy the relationship. And I can be quite strong, but I also know myself well enough to know that don't bend to me. Stay yourself. Stay strong. Because it's you can sense it in a relationship, and you want the other person to be true, to be truthful, to be authentic, as we say, and really show up for themselves.
Mm-hmm. It is. I mean, this is touching on so many different areas. I love about this topic. It has so many different connection points in relationship. I mean, to quote Shakespeare, to their own self be true,
Mm-hmm.
is really the way to get through all this, the whole process. A lot of times I think for power struggles in the conversation is because it comes from a place of neediness or from lack, that it isn't about being bigger than, better than, because if you are bigger or better than, you don't act that way. You oftentimes you go, well, I don't have to prove anything, because that's what it's about. It's about proving something. And so being caught up in that paradigm is so against the ability for the relationship to thrive. It's so about selfishness and control, which I said at the beginning, that it makes it harder to be in a relationship. So power struggles for me can really be the antithesis of a healthy relationship. So frankly, it's like, when we get a relationship, don't fight. It's as simple as that, because it doesn't make it that easy.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've said this before. I mean, there's fighting and there's needing to
Exactly.
dominate.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
having a disagreement or a quarrel about something is totally acceptable. It's the believing that you are either less than or better than
Mhm.
another human being. That's
Yeah.
where we get into trouble every
Absolutely.
time. And to quote another book that had such impact on me, because again, it was like, I do think it's a cultural thing. I mean, I think in the UK we are, well, certainly when I grew up there was this class system that was all about
Mhm.
power and control.
Oh yeah.
The lower class, the higher class. I mean, right there, the way we describe it even is a power dynamic. But what I was going to say, oh yeah, the seven. I think it's the seven secrets of highly successful people. When I first read about the win-win concept, I was like, win-win?
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
possibility that we could actually both win here? Because I was always under the impression until, I came here, thank God, when I was 21, that there really, to me, there was always a better than and a less than. There was always a power dynamic in a relationship,
Mhm.
always something to be afraid of, to assert yourself, to all of those things that I was mentioning earlier about. But when I heard win-win, it was like, wow, that it just hit at a core that is the only way we succeed in our relationships, in life,
Mhm.
ever,
Oh yeah.
ever, if it's a win-win.
I remember that win-win lesson in a seminar I took back in the end of 84, 1984, for those trying to keep track. It was something that was such a wake-up call for me. Same idea. It was because I'd never heard of it before. And the idea, because it was done when we played a game in a workshop where people in different rooms, and we basically had to trust what the other group was doing without actually seeing them and actually hearing what they were saying. And the recognition was, when we let go of trying to be in control and trying to have power over what was happening, and we trust the other group, they got the message somehow. Well,
Mm,
I know how. And then they trust us back, and it became a win-win, because the trouble is, if one group won by control, the other group would lose.
mhm.
But the thing is, if we both won, which we could do in the way the game was framed, it became easier. And that visceral experience, I remember in that room, we did it. We played the game in the evening. We talked about it the next day, and the understanding of like how powerful it was to let somebody else win so that we could win was a game changer. So I absolutely understand that. It's why relationships can be so healthy. Is when you both win, everybody's happy and everybody's successful and everybody's fulfilled. So the power struggle game is a win-lose game. It always is.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you're sharing that, I'm thinking about this, political season we're in right now, and I might have a slight leaning, but I very much identify as the centrist, and because I do firmly believe that we have to come together. We have to
Hmm.
acknowledge everybody's feelings and everybody's viewpoints and take that into consideration and try and make it a win-win for all of us, not just for 50% of the country, for all of us.
Right.
And I mean, that's a relationship on a massive scale, but that's where you're seeing a power dynamic play out right now. And I firmly believe that we can get there. I firmly believe we can get back to that beautiful place where we're all taken into consideration. We might not agree on everything, but we do realize that we live in a democracy and we need to take in each other's specific desires, wants, and concerns.
One of the things that stood out for me, because I had been watching bits and pieces of the DNC, and one thing it came up earlier in the conversation, I want to speak about it just briefly, is the interaction between Coach Walls and his son, Gus.
Oh,
That became a meme, and it was so beautiful to watch that. But watching people who couldn't handle it and had to decry it, and then realize they made a mistake by judging the son because he is, was it a vocal? Well,
non,
he
non, non-verbal. He has a
so
non-verbal.
vocal. non-verbal, so a verbal disability.
Yeah.
And it was such an interesting thing how people who basically were just looking to blast the other side because they could be in power before they realized what they were doing was sort of shooting themselves in the foot, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost like, maybe it's better if you just wait and watch what happens before you jump in and make something happen. And so in relationship, coming back to the romantic piece of it, oftentimes we tend to get very easily triggered by a partner because we want things to go a certain way. And so when they say something or do something or don't do something, we're already trigger happy and very almost auto responsive. One of the things, I mean, we talk about this in other ways too. I have this recommendation to clients, and especially in my own work, we're learning how to do this, is like, say, if you're getting upset, count to 10. Well, in a discord or a disparity with your partner, before you say something, count to 10 slowly and then see if it's still true to say it or not.
Yeah.
You might discover, I'm glad I didn't say that. Because then it shifts the paradigm.
We're going to pick this up next week because I'd like to speak more to this because I think it was such a profound moment, so many levels, and I do think it's worth giving some time to. I don't want to rush through it.
Okay.
It was again so profound, and about vulnerability, about expressing ourselves, about counting to 10 before we express ourselves. All of those things are really warranted. But for this week, we are at time. So let's follow this up next week. I would love to do that.
Sure.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us again, and we will see you all next week. Have a wonderful week, Barry.
Great topic. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you next week.
Okay. Bye-bye.
We trust you enjoyed this episode and invite you to share this with your friends and loved ones. In fact, please subscribe to our Relationship Mastery podcast. That way you'll get each new episode fresh and shiny as soon as it is released. We'd love to hear from you as well. So go ahead and enter your questions and comments at relationshipmastery.show. Take good care. We will connect with you in our next episode of Relationship Mastery.